Hello everyone, my name is Jen Kramer. I am an instructor. I've been teaching HTML and CSS for over 20 years, most recently at Harvard University, but I've taught in all kinds of environments, academic and commercial environments, workshops and online courses, all kinds of other things. And I am so excited to present to you the second version of my course on CSS grids and Flexbox layouts. Let's take a look at all of the cool things that you're going to learn inside of this course. First, we're going to start with Flexbox, and we're going to take a look at all types of different Flexbox properties and how you can set up grid-based layout systems using Flexbox across, of course, all of the various media queries. We'll move on to a cool trick that we can use with figures and figure captions, among other types of HTML markup. This is going to allow us to layer our figure captions on top of figures here for a really lovely looking web page. And then we're going to put together those two pieces of learning, that grid system and this concept of layering our captions with the figures, into a web page project here, the first part of it, where we will lay out a series of images here with lovely overlays describing all of these various types of images. We'll take a quick peek at CSS shapes and look at the lovely way we can make our text go on a slant like this. And of course, we'll work on our footer layout, and that will work across our various breakpoints. So of course, we're going to go to different layouts as we hit our different breakpoints here in that particular web page. Then we'll move on to adding a header and a footer for our web page. We'll look at Flexbox and how it can make very interesting looking nav bars. Here is an example where we have our logo in the middle of the nav bar, and then as we squash the screen down here, we wind up with the nav bar underneath, the logo on the top, and then finally we'll turn our navigation into a series of buttons, all using CSS. Then we'll move on to adding responsive images to the website. We'll talk about the various approaches to responsive images, including the picture element. We'll look at source set and sizes as ways of loading responsive images, and we'll include this hero element on the page as well as a featured print. And then using those responsive images, depending on what breakpoint we happen to be looking at, we'll look at different versions of that picture on the web page. Finally, to wrap up the Flexbox portion of this course, we will move on to adding the popular prints section of this homepage for a fully completed homepage by the end of the Flexbox unit of the course. Then we'll move on to CSS Grid. As always, we'll start with looking at the various individual properties, and we'll do that by looking at a painting by Piet Mondrian, and we'll code it up with CSS Grid. Then we're going to look at the same kind of figure and figure caption tricks that we did with Flexbox using absolute and relative positioning. Now we're going to make that happen instead using CSS Grid and Grid's fantastic ability to overlap cells. And so we don't need to use absolute and relative positioning. We can just use Grid to overlap those cells. That also means we can do other kinds of cool things with Grid like this by overlapping two figures and using CSS animation to fade in and out different pictures on the web page. We'll move on to adding a different section of the home page. In this case, it will be a mosaic-based layout where we'll have all different types of pictures of different heights and widths and spanning over rows and columns inside of our layout. And of course, we'll wind up making that responsive as well. We'll then take a look at some magazine-style layouts. So here we've got a series of cats on our page, and they have different placements and different sizes and different images and so forth. We'll look at how easily we can make that kind of magic happen without any math and just simply assigning a few classes and changing a few properties. You can achieve these types of layouts. And finally, we'll do a very cool trick here with cards. So we'll create cards that have one particular layout here on desktop. They'll move on to a very different kind of layout. Notice how we had the image in the middle of the text here. Now we've got the image on the left, the text on the right. with grid, and then finally back to a different type of layout here on mobile devices. And we'll walk through how we can do that, making use of Flexbox and grid and more grid inside of grid. And then finally, we'll build our final website where you have lots of choices for how that might look. This happens to be the way that I came up with it. Another mosaic style layout of a bunch of beautiful donut pictures and a cool overlay of the text here on top of one of the images inside of the grid cell. When we get to smaller dimensions, that text shows up first with the images stacked nicely underneath. As always with this course, it comes with a website which will give you all of the background information, all of the links to the various CodePens, some additional pointers and guidance along the way as we work through the information. And it's broken up into a chunk of material pertaining to Flexbox and a chunk of material pertaining to grid, so you can refer to this as you work through the materials on the course. And finally, all of the files are available on GitHub, so you can download all of the files and follow along with everything that I'm doing here in the course. I am really excited to be recording an update to the Flexbox and Grid course. I've reworked almost all of the material from the original version of this course, and I'm including all kinds of new techniques and new inspirations for you that I hope will inspire you to make more interesting layouts using Flexbox and Grid. So let's get started.